Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining this evening. We will be talking about Chicago's lead service line replacement program. I will introduce our fabulous speaker, Commissioner Cheng, in a moment. I just wanted to go through some of the rules for the evening with our webinars. If anyone's not been through this with us before, we are, first of all, recording this. Secondly, you will be able to go back and look at this on our Facebook page. If you're interested, we'll post it there. It's on Facebook Live right now. You can also find it through our website. We post it through YouTube, through a link on our website as well, so you can always go back that way. Also, if you registered in advance with us, we have your email. So we're going to do a follow-up email that's going to have a link to the recording along with any other resources that we might talk about this evening that come up. So we'll have all of that for you guys later. We are going to have about a 45-minute long presentation and then around 15 minutes at the end for your questions. Please put all of your questions in the Q&A section, not in the chat. The chat is, I believe, disabled actually. So all of your questions should just go into the Q&A. You might want to wait a little bit before you put them in there because a lot of questions I'm sure are going to be answered along the way, of course. So, so please just keep that in mind. Let's see. We also have our garden contest, our annual garden contest. We just opened up for voting. So if you go to our main website at chicagobungalow.org, there's a link right on the front on the main homepage where you can click to vote for the winners of this year's contest. They're fabulous entries, really fun to scroll through. So definitely encourage it. Love to hear, the more people voting, the better. We had tons of participation this year, tons last year. It's just a really fun contest. So please check that out. I believe that's all I have in terms of business. So let me introduce Commissioner Cheng. Andrea Cheng, PE, PhD, is the Commissioner for the City of Chicago Department of Water Management. She has more than 17 years of experience in the department where she's worked in every aspect of the water purification and distribution process. Cheng has overseen multiple large-scale research projects related to corrosion control of lead and managed capital plan projects, such as the $15 million construction of the department's new water purification labs. She developed the nation's largest 311 lead kit sampling program in the city's water filter distribution program. She's also managing the development and implementation of the multi-year, multi-billion-dollar plan to replace the nearly 380,000 residential lead service lines in Chicago. Cheng is a nationally recognized expert on issues related to water quality and has been published 40 times on the subject. She's a licensed professional engineer and a Class A public water supply operator with a BS in civil environmental engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and her MS and PhD in civil environmental engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you so much for joining us, Commissioner. You clearly know your stuff. We have so many members, of course, who are really interested in this issue and ask us these questions all the time. So we're so grateful that you took the time this evening. And just to remind everybody, we'll be doing all the questions at the end. Please just put them in the Q&A as they come up. And with that, I can turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Carla. And thank you all for being here tonight on a beautiful Thursday evening. You're here with me. I appreciate it. I will share slides here in just a second and we'll get started. There we go. Okay. So I've got slides here, and like Carla said, probably about 45 minutes, but I wanted to make sure to leave plenty of time at the end because with a program like this, I think often there's just a lot of questions at the end, and sometimes it's easier for the Q&A portion to get all your questions answered. I'm going to do a little bit about the history of the department before we get into lead, because I always think it's useful to understand how we got to this point. It's I always say it's very hard to appreciate what we have in terms of infrastructure if you don't understand how we got here. But I do want to start out by pointing out the difference between our department and the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, because this is a question that we get often. And in fact, they were here today for a tour and we were discussing how funny it is that people always think we're the others department. So Department of Water Management, we're in charge of getting the water to your homes and collecting it into our sewers, but the people who actually treat that wastewater and turn it back into clean water are our good friends at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. So we work together heavily, but it can be kind of confusing to know which organization to reach out to for which initiative. So we always like to point that out at the beginning of presentations. A little bit about our system. We have a very large system here in the city of Chicago. We have 2 crib water intake structures. So why a crib? These are actual structures, sort of like what we have here, that are protecting the intake tunnels that draw that raw water from the Lake Michigan to the 2 treatment plants so they can be treated. People actually used to live in these 24/7, if you can believe it. Tough job. And nowadays, though, we have a staff with a boat and they go out and they service these. People don't live in there anymore, but they're critical to protecting just that inlet of the water. We never want the water to not be able to flow from the lake into the treatment plants. So we've had a couple in the lake. If you ever look out on the shore and you kind of see this red and white one usually stands out and wonder what that is. That's our cribs. Only 2 of those cribs are actually in service currently, though. We do have ones that are no longer in service. And the treatment plants that we have to clean that raw Lake Michigan water into safe drinking water are some of the largest in the world. Our Jardine Plant has a capacity of 1.4 billion with a B gallons per day and is the world's largest. And then our Sawyer plant down by Rainbow Beach is 720 million gallons a day. And that is currently the world's 8th largest. It used to be the world's largest. So, you know, the size and scale of what we do here in the city is very large. And once that water is treated, it gets pumped to one of our 12 pumping stations that are located throughout the city. And no further treatment happens at those pumping stations, but the water is pressurized because we always want to make sure that by the time the water arrives at all of your homes, all your beautiful bungalows, that it is providing enough pressure to be able to, say, take a shower on the 2nd floor. And that's what those pumping stations do. But interestingly, of the 12, only 9 of them are electric, meaning the pumps that drive that water and pump that water are electrically driven. 3 of them are still steam powered, which you might ask why. It's a technology that hasn't changed much in 200 years, but it's very reliable. So many of originally all the pumping stations were steam driven. Over time, we've been converting them to electric as very large capital projects. It's very intense capital project, but those do help us reduce our carbon footprint when we switch from steam to electric, as well as save money on how much labor and energy we need to run those stations. And if anyone's ever gone out into the suburbs and you see those large water towers with their names on it, you notice we don't have those in the city, right? We don't have any elevated storage, as they call it. We're pump on demand, which means if one neighborhood needs more water, the pumping station that serves that neighborhood increases the amount of water they provide. It keeps us on our toes for sure, but it also means the water is very fresh. The water quality is really good because it's never sitting in an elevated storage tank for 2 days at a time. Once it goes to our pumping stations, then it flows through about 4,300 miles of water mains all the way to people's homes. That's a tremendous amount of mileage. It's about a water main under every city street. So if you think about that, a water main under every city street, that's a lot to maintain. So we have a staff of almost 2,000 people. A good portion of those have jobs that are maintaining or replacing those water mains. They last for about 100 years, which goes by fast when you have a system that's 180 years old. We're also in charge of maintaining the fire hydrants. There's about 48,000 of those in the city. And of course, we never want a fire hydrant to be out of service. So that's part of the job of DWM, is making sure those are ready for our friends at CFD. There's also a ton of water valves. We'd like to be able to isolate sections of our infrastructure, of our distribution system in case there's any issues, breaks or leaks. And so that means we have to have valves in the distribution system in order to do that. So that's another item that we maintain a ton of. And that's on the water system. On our sewer system, we of course have a combined sewer system. So that's a system that takes both rainwater or stormwater and the wastewater from people's homes, the sewage, and combines it. That's pretty typical for older cities, but it can mean a challenging maintenance. Our system drains about 230 square miles, which is enormous. And we have about 4,600 miles of sewer mains under pretty much, again, every Chicago street. Those range in diameter from small, 8 inches in diameter to 21.5 feet in diameter, which is just enormous. We're just moving a lot of water through these tunnels. There's also about 205,000 catch basins. So those are the graded infrastructure that are in the curb and collect the stormwater into this and direct them towards the sewers. We also have 150,000 sewer manholes to maintain. And because we do have our combined sewer system, we also have 184 combined sewer overflows that have to be monitored and tracked over time. And so a little bit about the history of how we got to this. You know, originally people got water from not even the lake, from the river. But over time, the Chicago River became the receptacle for Chicago's waste. And that water, you know, tainted the river and people stopped using it. Eventually, people started using the lake. But, you know, you had sort of a horse carrying a barrel out a little bit into the lake, not very far, where it's still basically a beach, and collecting and filling up these barrels. And then they'd walk these barrels around and hand out ostensibly clean water. And that's how people got their water for a long time. Then eventually it was decided that people were still really getting sick from lake water, cholera, typhoid, a lot of those things were being carried from the river into the lake. So this very clever gentleman, Ellis Sylvester Chesbrough, he was chief engineer way back when, and he created 3 super important projects that protected our drinking water. And these, when you think about the quality of water that people received before this, it's kind of unbelievable. In 1858, he decided to start raising downtown Chicago, the buildings in downtown Chicago, about 4 to 14 feet in order to construct sewers underneath. So just think about that for a moment. He says, we're just going to raise up all the buildings in downtown. And people thought he was a little crazy, but eventually they could see the benefit. And so there's these giant jack screws that they use to slowly turn and slowly raise these buildings, because collecting the wastewater and the sewage into sewers was really the only way that they were going to be able to collect and keep that from tainting any of the drinking water supplies. In addition, in 1867, he helped create the first water tunnel, the Verse Crib, and they put it about 2 miles out into Lake Michigan, because before that, like I said, you either had that barrel on a horse kind of going out a little bit into the water, or for a little bit of, since between about the 1840s and 1860s, you had about 150-foot pipe going into the beach in essence and collecting water, and it was pumped into a sort of a water stand and then pumped out to a very limited distribution radius in what would be just a few blocks of downtown Chicago now. And so in 1867, when they decided to put the crib out 2 miles, that was a novel concept to be able to collect water that we knew was cleaner, water that wouldn't have been tainted by the Chicago River, and could be a consistent source of clean water. But if you think about that, 1867, that's just shortly after the Civil War. To think about building a water tunnel under Lake Michigan, it sounds like a mighty dangerous job. So, but they completed it, which is impressive. And then in the late 1860s, he came up with the idea to actually reverse the Chicago River, to say, okay, well, you're putting waste into the lake from the Chicago River. How about we stop that? And so since they had already done the sewers and they had done the crib, this was sort of the last piece to protecting drinking water for Chicago. And so they reversed the Chicago River, which sent contaminated water away from Lake Michigan, although down into the Mississippi River and to our friends in St. Louis who didn't like that very much. But it protected clean drinking water for the city of Chicago. So when you think about the work that was done for that first crib, here's a rendering. You know, people could kind of barely stand up in it because of 5-foot diameter. And you know, they sort of had these rails to cart materials in and out of these tunnels. And they started on both ends. They actually floated out the outer structure of the crib 2 miles, sank it with bricks, and then began building both from shore and the crib and met in the middle. And mind you, this is in the days before AutoCAD. So the engineering design on this was impressive because they only were 7 inches offset in the middle when they met. And that's just amazing. And it was constructed 60 feet below the lake level. So that's, you know, it was really dangerous work at the time. And that water at the time went to Chicago Avenue Pumping Station and the water tower. So in this rendering here, it was put in 1869. This is what's now Michigan Avenue here. Looks a little different than today, a little more quaint. But this water tower is, of course, still here today. And it was one of the few things to survive the Great Chicago Fire. In fact, it was one of the buildings that people used as a marker when they couldn't figure out where their home was and all the rubble. They used the pumping station and water tower as a landmark. So we have pictures of people wandering after the Chicago Fire, sort of pointing at this, the water tower, which is pretty incredible. And this pumping station serves most of downtown. So still very much in use. And this is one of the pumping stations that was converted from steam to electric. So there was space inside the pumping station. And now there is a theater that you can actually go inside and see a show inside of our active pumping station. And here's a diagram of them reversing the river. So here's the cribs, the active cribs. And you can see in blue was the original layout of river. And in red is where they dug channels to be able to reverse the flow. Instead of the river going into the lake, the river flowed out of the lake and down the Des Plaines River down to the Mississippi. Really an engineering feat, because this here is the Continental Divide. They had to dig through the Continental Divide to do that. And this is a diagram, this is a picture of the construction. So it was started in 1895 and was completed in 1900. And if you can just imagine the amount of work it must have taken to do this. And, you know, we didn't rest on our laurels. So here now we have a crib 2 miles out. We have sewers in the city of Chicago. We have a reversed river. But our staff started hearing about this newfangled thing called filtration of drinking water. In particular, this gentleman, John Bayless, it was really a pioneer in water filtration. And so he created this experimental filtration plant at our 68th Street pumping station, 68th and Ogilvy. And he had these are little filter beds that he sort of created within the pumping station to try and see if we could filter water and make it cleaner and safer for people. You know, before this point in time, people got, you know, raw lake water, possibly with chlorine in it in the later years, but that's about it. So sometimes, you know, you would have a little bit of sand or fish in your water. And it was also, by the way, being pumped through wooden water mains at this point in time. So bearing that in mind, the idea of filtering this through sand was pretty novel. And what he's doing here on the right might look odd, but he's actually smelling the water. So our staff still do this to this day. I like to say they're water sommeliers, and they are, smelling the water to see if it smells musty or chlorinous, or if it smells, different in any way than how it's supposed to smell. By the end of the treatment process, we add chlorine, so it should smell chlorinous. And at certain times of the year, the lake turns over, so it can smell musty. And we actually do alter our treatment process depending on what we smell in the water. But he was really a pioneer of water quality. And here's what it looked like when we started giving away that free filtered water for the first time. We had people in their Sunday finest showing up in Model Ts to get their 1 gallon jug of free filtered water. So it was considered a success. People were very interested in having cleaner, safer drinking water. So we decided that was something that we would pursue. And we're actually able to put that in place in 1947. So formerly called the South Water Purification Plant, because there was a South, a Central, and a North. It's now called the Sawyer Water Purification Plant. And this employed the concepts of that filtration for the first time in Chicago. This is the one located near Rainbow Beach. And at the time, as I said, it was the world's largest conventional drinking water plant. So people did tours here. There's marble statues and lots of odes to water there that are pretty neat. This was supposed to be the facility that served the south side. Then we had Central, which is now named Jardine. And then they actually originally, envisioned a north side plant, which we never built because we didn't really actually need it in the end. But this serves about 31st Street South and all the southern suburbs. Then, about 20 years later, the north side finally got filtered drinking water. So for a while, the south siders were making fun of the north siders because they did not have filtered drinking water. And sometimes their drinking water was muddy on a stormy day that kicked up debris. So if you can believe it, we did not have filtered drinking water in all of the city of Chicago until 1964. And I don't know about you guys, but that's fairly recent time to me. So that just kind of boggles my mind. And this is a picture of our Jardine plant. So the formerly called Central plant. This serves 31st Street to the north and all the northern suburbs. So we serve about 5.3 million people between these two plants. And that's city of Chicago and 120 suburbs. It's actually almost half the state of Illinois. So we don't take any decision about our treatment processes lightly, and everything we do is thoroughly researched before we do any of it. This is sort of a map of the area we serve. The light green here is the city of Chicago, and then all the multicolored spots here, all the different towns that we've added over time. As you may have seen the news, we're working on adding the city of Joliet here down the southwest side. A lot of the areas in this part of Illinois are running out of groundwater. And so they are looking to get Lake Michigan water for the source of their drinking water. So that's a really exciting new project that we're working on. But in total, between the two plants, it's about 750 million gallons a day on average. The total capacity, though, is 2.1 billion. So if you can imagine 2.1 billion jugs of milk, that's a pretty crazy thought, but that's actually the capacity of just our two treatment plants. So now, now that you have that little bit of history, we start talking about lead. So how did we get to the point where we had lead service lines, and what even is a lead service line? So I talked about how there's a water main and a sewer main under every city street, right? So that's indicated in this blue circle and this gray circle. But how do you get the water from that water main into people's homes? And how do you get the sewage from the home into that sewer? Well, we have connectors that we call a water service line and a private sewer drain. And so that's indicated here. The water service line is C, and the private sewer drain or sewer service laterals, that's also called, is D. And we also have water meters, that's E, so we can actually measure how much water goes into your home. Without a water meter, we don't know. And we still have non-metered accounts in Chicago for sure. But people often wonder if we can tell how much water is in their home. And the answer is not without a meter. We also, in order to be able to control the flow of the water, have this here in the letter B, which is a B box or buffalo box. And that's an outdoor water shutoff valve, so that if something goes wrong and you have a break here, you can actually stop the flow of water from the water main into your home. You usually also have an interior shutoff. So they are two different things. There's an outdoor and an indoor shutoff. So unfortunately, this water service line is usually made of lead until 1986. Now, the caveat to that is that it was only made up to 2 inches in diameter. So if you're in a very large office building, let's say, it is probably a 3 or 4 inch diameter or bigger service coming in because you need more water for facilities like that. So it has a bigger diameter. And so they're often made of cast iron or copper. But for smaller residents like single family and 2 flats, most often these are lead up until 1986. And so because in Chicago, so many were installed up until 1986, we have 387,000 estimated lead service lines here. Unfortunately, we're the city with the largest number because we actually required lead to be installed through plumbing code until 1986. So we have, all the cities have a challenge in replacing these lead service lines, but we have a particular challenge. You add in the fact of the number that we have with the fairly dense urban underground, where you can't dig anywhere in the city without finding multiple utilities. And it is a challenge that we have been working on. The other part that's complicated is that this water service line isn't just owned by the city. It's partially owned by the city between this water main and this buffalo box, and then partially owned by the homeowner between B and E here. So trying to replace something that's owned by 2 entities is not fun either. And that's pretty typical. Most cities have a division of ownership like that. The good thing in Chicago is that despite the number of lead service lines that we have here, we work really hard on corrosion control, and we have been since 1976. We add a phosphate that is added to the water that creates a coating inside the lead pipe, and that minimizes the leaching of lead into the water. And so regardless of whether you have a lead service line or not, that helps protect the drinking water for everyone. And so because of that, our water tests are actually below the federal standards. But despite that, it's still not a good idea to have lead service lines in the ground, and we're working to replace those. And a lead service line replacement is expensive. It is $16,000 to $30,000 each, depending on the length of this and a couple other factors. And as you can imagine, if this water main here was not close to this house, but was on the other side of the street, this service line is even longer. So the length of service lines can vary a lot in Chicago. I've seen them anywhere from 35 feet to 150 feet. And so that can vary the cost a lot. It's also worth noting too that lead in water is something that's talked about a lot right now, but my friends at CPH will always remind me that lead poisoning in the city of Chicago is caused by lead paint. And so we always want to be mindful that as we work to replace lead service lines, that we are also making sure that everyone knows to still get kids tested for lead, check for lead paint in your home, and do all those things that they've been working hard on since the 70s, because that has made a lot of progress there, but there are still some homes in the city of Chicago with lead paint. And so how do you even tell if you have a lead service line? If you go to our website at leadsafechicago.org, we have put all the resources there for both lead in water and lead paint. We work with CDPH on that. And we sort of walk you through from kind of step 1 in the upper left-hand corner, all the way through to getting your full lead service line replaced or even participating in research. And so the first thing we do is check to even find out if you have a lead service line. And then we also recommend flushing your water as well, because one thing we do find is that if you're the kind of person that rarely uses water in your home, or maybe you're a snowbird and you're just not home very often, people that use very, very little amounts of water are much more likely to have high lead levels than people that use normal amounts of water. So we always recommend that if your water's been sitting more than, say, 6 hours, whether it's like overnight or maybe you're coming home from work, to just flush that line. And that doesn't necessarily mean opening up your tap. It can mean flushing your toilet, doing a load of laundry, doing a load of dishes. Anything that moves water into the home is what we mean when we say flushing. I don't just mean flushing toilets too. I do have to clarify that because that can be confusing to people. And just doing that on a regular basis will makes a huge difference in lead levels. And we always like to remind people too to use cold water. If you're preparing baby formula or you're cooking, you want to use cold water. Why is that? Because hot water dissolves more lead. In addition, your hot water heater usually collects metals. So not just lead, but other metals as well. And most people haven't done the annual flush that the hot water heater manufacturers recommend. And most people don't even know they're supposed to do that. And so your hot water heater can also be an additional source of lead. It's also important to clean your aerator. So at the tip, that's this one here. And if you go to our website and you click on one of these, we have diagrams and more information on each one. But if you click on the faucet, or if you look at the end of a faucet, you'll see a little screen in most faucets, and that's called an aerator. And you can unscrew that usually. And if you look behind it, you'll see lots of little pieces of debris that just naturally accumulate over time. And some of those pieces could be lead. So if you wash that screen regularly, you're making sure that as the water passes through, it's not passing through chunks of lead in your aerator. And you'd be surprised how much of a difference that can make as well. We also see lead in faucets, which you may not expect, but before January 1st, 2014, people were allowed to have up to 8% of lead in brass. And a lot of things have brass in them, including faucets. And so you can actually see lead leaching off of older faucets. So that's one of our very common recommendations is if you have a faucet from before January 1st, 2014, to replace it. And that will always help. And then you get to a point where you're saying, okay, I've done all these things and I've checked and I see that I do have a lead service line. Okay, then we recommend getting a free water test because most people, even if they have a lead service line, have lower amounts of lead. And so if you do have a higher amount of lead, it's important to know so you can take further steps. So we always encourage people to do our free lead testing kits. We mail them out and I'll step through that process in a few minutes as well. But you could have two neighbors sitting right next to each other and one could have high lead and one could not have high lead. It's completely irrelevant, the geography. It's mainly about your particular home, how you have, changed your plumbing over time and how you use your water. So it's very customized to the individual house. For people who have high lead or other disturbances or work going on around their home, we recommend our water filters. So we have pitcher filters that we give out for free as well. That I'll go through that as well, that you would want to use in the interim while you're working on other corrective measures if you have high lead. And then finally, we have replacing your actual lead service line. And so that's obviously a more involved process that I'll step through as well. But that's sort of like from, little investment to big investment, our universe of lead. We also have some voluntary water studies going on. We actually do a ton of research here at the Department of Water Management and have conducted some of the biggest research studies on lead in the nation. So we have some pretty interesting academic stuff as well. But in terms of that first step, that at-home survey, you can go on our website and click and it'll walk you through a few basic questions to identify whether your service line coming into your house is lead or copper or what they call galvanized steel or iron, galvanized iron, you might hear it called. They tend to, galvanized tend to be in older homes as well. But just by checking with a magnet and doing a little bit of scratching, usually you can identify the difference between the three of these because the lead is not magnetic. And it's also like a silver gray and very dull when scratched, whereas the copper is really shiny. It's obviously a different color and it's not magnetic. But the galvanized, you think that maybe you could, might get confused between lead and galvanized because they're both gray, but the galvanized is magnetic. So there's some pretty simple things that you can do to tell the difference. The other tricky thing here is if you look, there's a little bulb on this lead one. They call it a lead bulb. And often when that lead line was originally connected to the rest of the system, the process that they use to connect it results in these kind of funny ballooned bulbs. And so if you see one of those, there is no other type of service line that has a bulb like that. That is just lead. And so you can actually fill the survey out online and even send in a picture. And that helps us with our inventory because we're trying to get an online inventory so that people can look up and see at least what we know so far about the service line coming into their house, whether it's the public side or the private side. We've been working on material identification since 2016. We don't have a finalized list, but we're working towards it. So anyone that helps fill this out helps us get towards our inventory goals and helps you figure out if you should be working further in identifying, lead levels in your home. And so if you've decided that you're going to do water testing, we have a very large water testing program, a free water testing program in Chicago. We offer it to any resident, mailed straight to your home. And that's apartments, that's, single family 2-flat, anyone who requests it. And it looks like this. It's a little box. It comes in with instructions. Actually, our instructions look a little bit different now. We've made them more graphical and easier to read. And 3 bottles. And these bottles are for different timed samples. So what the instructions will tell you to do is to not use your water for 6 hours. Usually that's overnight. Most people just don't use their water after they go to bed. And before they use any water in the morning, when they wake up, they fill out these 3 bottles. And the first bottle is for the moment you open up that faucet and turn on the faucet, you take a liter of water and then you continue to let it flow. And you take one at 2 minutes and you continue to let it flow and you take one at 5 minutes. And the reason we have more than one bottle is that you see vastly different lead levels depending on the time that you take it. So we get these 3 bottles help give us what we call a profile. It'll usually go up and then down, depending on if you have lead in your faucet or not. And usually by 5 minutes, or as we call it, the 5-minute flush, we expect lead levels to be pretty low, because you've basically moved all the water that was sitting stagnant inside your lead service line past and out of the faucet, and you should be getting fresh water from the water main, because there is no lead in our water mains. The only place where there's lead is in the service lines. So once you're getting water fresh from the water main, that usually has very little lead in it. But that helps us confirm it, because if we see higher levels in a 5-minute sample, we know something's really wrong. Maybe there's low pressure or there's other things going on in the home, and we help identify what that is. Once the kit's filled out, the resident just needs to schedule the pickup. We'll pick it right up off their porch. We have a website that you can use for scheduling, or you can call the number that'll be listed on the instructions, but we try to make it as easy for everyone as possible. It's mailed right to your home. You don't have to leave to have it picked up, because we want everyone to feel comfortable getting their water sampled. And it can be an owner or a renter, it doesn't matter, just whoever, whatever name is on the request is who we send it back to. And you can request that both on our website, as on Let's Save Chicago, as well as chicagowaterquality.org or 311. We have an independent certified laboratory that does the analysis. And we have actually mailed out over 100,000 of these since 2016. Before 2016, we used to do these in person. We'd send out one of our staff to do the analysis and samples in people's homes, and then, communicate with them directly. But in 2016, our demands increased so much that we had to switch to this mailed kit program. We used to do just 30 to 40 a year before this. So we only unfortunately get about 32% returned though. So we're trying to, that's one of the reasons that we retooled the instructions to make sure that people understood how simple it really is to fill these out, to try and get more of these returned, because we go through all the effort of requesting one, but often it just sits on people's counters and they get busy doing other things and kind of forget about it. So we're working on trying to get people to return those. And we've gotten about 32,000 of them returned. So that's a lot of data that helps us plan our programming. And then if anything is high, we have a sanitary engineer, an electrician, and a plumber that go out to that home and do a more detailed profile. They'll take actually 12 bottles and really try to narrow down what's going on and what's the source of the high lead and provide customized recommendation to that homeowner. They'll send a letter, they'll talk to the homeowner in person. It's a very detailed free analysis, and we've done that about 2,200 times now. Which is really impressive because a lot of that was during COVID. And once you've done this testing, if you determine that your lead is high, and get notification your lead is high, you would be eligible for one of these free filter sets. And in addition to people that have tested high for lead, we also provide them to homes that have a meter, and homes that have been along a water sewer main replacement project, just to be on the safe side. Because those in theory could have had some kind of disturbance to that lead coating. So we like to play it safe and just offer free filter kit sets to everyone. We've had about 25% of people take us up on it. Some people tell us they already have one. But if you're interested in getting a filter, you can go to our website here, chicagowaterquality.org/filters, and type in your address, and it'll say if you're eligible or not, or call our phone, our hotline, and we'll let you know. It comes with this pitcher and 6 of these replacement cartridges that are approved by NSF specifically for reducing lead. Now, I don't use filters in my home because I'm pretty knowledgeable about all the water quality. I know how safe it is, but for those who want it, I encourage you to just make sure, if you're not using one of ours, make sure that it actually reduces lead, because not every filter reduces lead. So that's why there's an NSF 53 list that specifically says, here's the ones approved for reducing lead. And lead service line replacement. So once we've gotten to the point where a customer says, yes, I'm interested in lead service line replacement, we have a couple of programs. We have it divided into 2 phases. Sort of our phase 1 that started in 2021 and our phase 2 that's starting next year or the end of this year. For phase 1, we have the equity lead service line replacement, and that is pretty unique to Chicago, but it is funded with a grant that allows us to do free full lead service line replacement, meaning both the public and the private side, for low-income homeowners. We also have our homeowner initiated lead service line replacement, which I'll go through in a minute. And those are for people who don't want to wait to find out if they qualify for other programs. And we also have a pilot at the block level where we do lead service line replacement at the same time as water main replacement. Some other cities have found success with getting more efficient replacement rates by doing that. Our phase 2, which starts at the end of this year for daycares, is really exciting. We have a contract out to bid, and we'll be doing lead service line replacement for daycares that have lead service lines, which is really neat because you're replacing a lead service line. It doesn't just impact one family; it impacts kids from multiple families. So we're really excited about that project. We'll also be doing lead service line replacement alongside water and sewer main replacements, and alongside any breaks or leaks in that service line. So a little bit more about the equity program. This is the one that gets the most press, but it can be confusing because we do have multiple programs. So the eligibility requirements for this are driven by HUD, which is the grantor of the grant that we have, the Community Development Block Grant. So they stipulate that the recipients have to be owner occupied, meaning it can't be a renter. It has to be the person that owns the property, lives there. And they have an income less than 80% of the area median as defined by HUD, which is for this year about $83,350 for a family of 4. It varies depending on the number of people you have in the home. And if those 2 requirements are met, we can perform free full lead service line replacement. So that's a $30,000 value on your home, which is really great. We're very excited to have this grant. We got about $15 million for lead service line replacement through that grant, and we have a target of about 600 replacements. We have gotten over 2,000 applications, most of them in the last month, because we recently put out a lot of press about the expanded eligibility. Originally, we limited this program to those who had high lead or children in the home. And that was really great. We're able to focus on those people first because, those are the people that are most impacted by lead, but are going to be the least able to replace it on their own. But once we had sort of that low-hanging fruit taken care of, then we expanded it now to everyone who has a lead service line and meets the eligibility income criteria. We also streamlined the processing because our biggest challenge right now is that part of this application process is proving that you own the home and that your income is below the threshold. And so that means you have to provide supporting financial documents. If anyone's ever participated in Department of Housing's roof and porch program, it's the same way there. But our target audience here, people who are low income and own their own home, they're not always the same people who have access to a lot of online documentation of their financials. So it's very paper driven, and getting that paper either uploaded to our portal where we take applications or mailed to us so we could do a paper review has been challenging. In fact, many of them never provide their supporting financial documents. And so we have, of those 2,000, we have a good number that are just sitting on hold with us trying to do outreach and get them to find different ways to return those documents. This is sort of what the list looks like. And we have it broken into 3 groups. One is identifying yourself. Another one is, identifying you own the property. And the third part is your income. So you don't have to provide all of this. You have to, a lot of this is, you provide either this or that. But you can see why this might be daunting to some folks. And so we've actually gone so far as to send our staff to people's homes to help scan the documents for them and upload it to our portal. Our website is mobile friendly, and you can use a picture actually of your document to upload to our portal, but even that isn't enough. So we've also gone to a lot of libraries to try and do document collection en masse at locations like that, but we're continuing to work on outreach to help people understand what they need to provide as part of the application. For our homeowner initiated program, for those who don't want to wait to see if they qualify for the programs or are part of the breaks and leaks or low income, we have a permit waiver program. So if people go and hire a contractor on their own, we waive the permit fees, which is up to $3,100. So, it's an independent project, and we have on our website the questions that people should ask those contractors before they decide on someone, and sort of it's documentation to step you through the process of what you should expect with a private contractor. And we pay those permit fees out of our operating budget. We don't expect a lot of people to be able to take us up on this, but for those who are able, it makes sense for us to at least offer to waive the permit fees. And then as I mentioned, we have our pilot where we'll be doing lead service line at the same time as we replace a water main along the street. So that's going to help us identify some new construction techniques and how we can best coordinate between all the entities that would have to be on the block at the same time. So we have some money from the EPA through the SRF, State Revolving Loan Fund program that has principal forgiveness. And because of that, it allows us to do both the public and the private side. So it's just one block. It's meant to be our pilot so we can scale up from there once we learn about what procedures work best. And as I mentioned, our daycares. So we have about $2.5 million in state funding for the daycares, which will do about 100 locations starting next month. And we're working on prioritizing those locations for low income neighborhoods right now, and performing outreach so that we can get and let these daycares know that this option is available. So we're really excited about that as well. And we know that in our regulatory landscape, things keep changing. So stay tuned. We know we have a state law that's put certain stipulations in place about inventorying and when we have mandatory lead service line replacement. But we also have a lot going on at the federal level in terms of, I'm sure you've all seen, the bipartisan infrastructure law has put some funding through. Right now, those are all as loans for water, not grants, which can make things tricky. But there's still tweaking the lead and copper rule at the federal level. So different regulations may be coming soon, and we're trying to stay nimble. So our programs will adapt as necessary. And so that is just a picture of our website, Let's Save Chicago. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. That was so fascinating about the history too. I mean, amazing. I'm amazed by how much I did not know about that. We have just a few questions still, and Angel had answered some along the way as well for you guys. And some of the information might be repeated, but it's always nice to have, to kind of go back over some things. Okay, somebody was concerned about the financial information that's being shared and wondering if that might be why people are hesitant. Is there, if you could maybe speak to the safety around that?
Yeah, good point. So that definitely was one of the concerns for folks that, especially those that aren't used to putting their stuff online. Our website is secure. We have a lot of IT folks that make sure that that is a secure website. And we have the people that are collecting that data are people that have been trained on what to do. And there are, internal staff, but even that does make people, still people are a little nervous. I think what was most successful was when people went to their home, often it was somebody, we're literally on the phone. Okay, Mrs. Jones, like we're going to come to your house tomorrow at 2 p.m. We'll get your, your tax document and scan it for you. So they, heard a friendly voice. We showed up in person to the home, scanned the document. So that it was something that, they could kind of trust seeing a person, the same person that they talked to on the phone, showing up in person. We have some of our friendliest staff do the calling, but it is still definitely a challenge. And I think once more of these lead service line replacements are done and neighbors start talking to neighbors, letting them know, yeah, it's a safe program, you don't need to worry. That's when I think we'll see an uptick in people finally following through on that side. That's what we saw with Meter Save when we first implemented that program. Was it really didn't matter if I came knocking your door and saying this is a great program. Who they're really going to believe is their neighbor. And so we try to capitalize on that and put up testimonials so that people can see real people like them in their neighborhood are having this done and having success.
Right. I remember that with Meter Save. We did some stuff on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to read, just to give a quick example, one of our members did write in and just explaining their process with this, just so folks have a thing, and then we do have a few more questions. Jose wrote us and said that he applied in December. They came to take a lead test around March. They replaced the service line from the street all the way to my water heater and installed a new electric water meter as well, all brand new piping, and they did the cement work as well, zero cost to me. The process takes a long time, but totally worth it. The contractor who came to do the measurements on my basement said I was lucky. It's easily a $25,000 job out of pocket. They do the job within a few hours. I just had to pay to have my fence rewelded since it was not city property. That part was only $100. So just to your point, this is a member of ours, who qualified, I think was income qualified, as an example. Somebody asked about whether or not the schools had had their lines replaced yet.
Yeah, actually the funny thing about schools is people are always worried they have lead service lines, but actually they don't. They're all gone. What they do have, why they measure lead in water is their water fountains. Some of the older water fountains, remember I mentioned about brass. They have brass and some other galvanized steel that can have a little bit of lead in it that can leach in when people don't use the water. And what happens with every school on the weekends and during the summer? They don't use the water. So a lot of what CPS, and they are a model for the nation, by the way, we worked with them to set up their initial sampling program, and they've really run with it. So other cities look to them for testing protocols, but it's a lot around flushing and making sure they maintain that coding and sampling and communicating with the schools. So they do have lead that they test for, but it's not because of lead service lines.
Okay. If we are having our water mains replaced right now, does that mean we won't get the LSL replaced for a while?
Good question. So no, what we're going to do is, in addition to doing lead service line replacement alongside water and sewer main jobs, part of the next phasing is prioritizing lead service line alone, going down a block level still, but prioritizing based on either low income or those who would be most at risk, those who maybe use lower amounts of water and thus might have higher lead levels, but still doing it at the block level, but just leaving the water main alone. So we have a lot of different facets to these programs, and we're working on how to make it not confusing for people.
Mhm.
But we'll also be doing lead service line with every break and leak. And we have about 4,000 to 5,000 of those a year. So we're also working on making sure people aren't surprised by that. If it's 2 a.m. and your water service breaks, we'll be there to fix it. But then we'll be coming back shortly thereafter to replace the entire thing with a copper service line.
Got it. If a meter was installed in the past, does your department have a record of the type of service line in that home, or are you looking for homeowners to provide that info all the time now?
Great. Another great question. Yeah, actually, so what we did, and we were cleverer than we realized back in 2009, when we started MeterSafe, we started documenting exactly that, the internal side. When we went to go install the meter inside the home, we documented the material that we saw coming in. So we have that private side often if you have a meter installed, but what we don't necessarily have is the public side. And the other tricky part of it is that inside, sometimes you'll see a little bit of copper, and it can be a red herring because you might only have 2 feet of copper just going right into the ground if, say, there was like a repair, and it might be lead underneath it. So we are making sure that we identify both the public side and the private side, and ideally with a lead test too, because then that'll show you that profile over time. And if you see where maybe you think you have a copper coming into your home and your lead levels are low, but then they spike up high, that probably means you have a little bit of copper connected to a whole lot of lead. So it can be tricky, but we are basically trying to collect every bit of information we can. Anytime our folks are going out and they lay eyes on a service line in any way, we're trying to record that in our database.
Okay, great. How do you know if a city line has already been replaced?
So in order to replace a city line or to replace the water line, there's a permit that's pulled. So it's possible that maybe a previous owner might have done it, but you would definitely know if your line had been replaced because it's, something that, your water is shut off for a few hours and to actually do the construction work. If you suspect that maybe a previous owner has it done, I would suggest a lead test is the quickest and easiest way to determine it for sure. You can also hire someone to do some digging, but that's a lot of work. Usually a lead test is a little more informative in that arena.
A couple people wondering why the replacement program is so expensive. Like, what are the costs there if they don't qualify, or even if they do, I suppose.
Sure. And some of the cheapest programs in the country run probably in the 10 to 15K, 1,000 range. So if you go out to some of the rural areas, we don't have to contend with any other utilities underground, and you don't have a lot of cement to replace, sidewalk and asphalt to replace. You can get some of the cheaper values, and that's because you can do things like trenchless techniques where you either pipe pull or you send a bullet under the ground because you're not worried about hitting other utilities. So it's pretty, a lot simpler to do it there. What makes it more expensive in Chicago is the dense urban underground. So far, we just got the approval from Illinois Department of Public Health to be able to do trenchless because we have so many other utilities underground, and we're trying to not hit other things and keep everything separated properly. So we'll be trying that, and that will hopefully reduce costs somewhat. But also the run of restoration that we do is significant, right? The cost of asphalt, the cost of replacing any sidewalk can be substantial. Now, if we do trenchless, it's also that helps reduce the amount of restoration that's even needed. So that's another benefit to that. And we just are in the process of piloting it right now. But when you hear people talk about the cost of lead service line replacement, always make sure to see what they're talking about. Are they talking about just the private side, just the public side, or all of it with restoration? I've definitely seen a lot of different quotes that may be not fully accurate because they're not looking at the full set of work that's involved. They might say, oh, I'm doing it alongside water main, so I don't count restoration. I'm putting the restoration charges towards water main. Well, in the end, you're still paying that for that restoration. So what we try to be transparent and provide the full cost of everything that we do as part of it.
Okay. I know there's a few more. Angel's been frantically responding well, amazingly. I guess maybe just for a final question, is there a sense of realistically when the whole city would be would be replaced?
Yeah, it's multiple decades for sure. If you look at what other cities have been able to achieve, even the fastest, 7,000 maybe a year, 10,000 a year, but most other cities have less than half, a lot less than half of what we have. So there's a limitation when it comes to the number of contractors that you can even have, the number of city streets you can have torn up at one point, altogether. So in addition to funding, of course. And so it will take us multiple decades, which is why prioritization is so key. As we rolled out, we wanted to be equitable about this, and we wanted to make sure that people that were most impacted by lead were served first. And in the meantime, we have our corrosion control that we continue to optimize. In fact, we'll be switching from one type of phosphate to another at the end of 2023 to continue to try and optimize that dosing and lower lead levels a little bit to keep that coating going. So, we want to make sure that that's still being worked on at the same time as we're doing lead service line replacement.
Great. Okay. I think with that, we'll wrap up just to respect everybody's time. But I wanted to remind everybody who's still on here or who looks at this later, we're going to be sending out a follow-up email with that will have this recording, which you can also find on our Facebook page and probably in a week or so through our website as well. We're going to have that link. We'll have a link to these programs and the application website link for that. And if there are some additional questions that some of these we sort of have answered, if there are a few additional ones that maybe we can get some responses as well from you guys, we'll include those in the emails as well. But thank you so much, Commissioner Cheng. This was really informative, really helpful. It's a big issue, obviously, for all of us. So we really appreciate all the demystifying as well. And yeah, have a wonderful evening. It looks beautiful out.
Thank you so much for having me here tonight. And I also forgot we have Chicago cans, I think that you'll be doing a raffle for. So we have 6 of them of different designs. So thank you again for listening to this presentation tonight.
Thank you. Have a wonderful night, everybody.